obstacle whatever now to the creation of an efficient index to all human knowledge, ideas, and achievements. To the creation, that is, of a complete planetary memory for all mankind.
He was one of the early inventors of science fiction. The idea of time travel, the possibility of invisibility, of intergalactic struggles. And then he came up with ideas of how we might reorganize the knowledge apparatus of the world, which he called the world brain. For Wells, the world brain had to contain all that was learnt and known, and that was being learnt and known.
If you have access to anything that's been written, not just theoretical access, but like instant access next to your brain, that changes your idea of who you are.
It can be reproduced exactly and fully in Peru, China, Iceland, Central Africa, or wherever else.
They were frank in their ambition and dazzling in their ability to execute it.
The Google Book Scanning Project is clearly the most ambitious world brain scheme that has ever been invented.
This is no remote dream, no fantasy. It is a plain statement of a contemporary state of affairs.
Il y aurait un grand danger à ce que Google ait le monopole de cette ambition.
The nightmare scenario in 20 years' time would be Google tracking everything we read.
Google could basically hold the whole world hostage.
Ever since Wells, science fiction is always about the possibility that people don't really matter in the future, and the plot is always about some heroic person that either succeeds or doesn't succeed in proving that people really matter after all.
It's a library, a public library, where people go to look at books and read them and take them away. That girl works at the library, and she checks on books that are going out and books that are coming back in.
I love libraries. I like the smell of paper properly preserved. It's as if it's the smell of a hay barn that's been cleared of all its animals and made into human intelligence.
And in a library, you really, even if you're sitting in the tea room discussing your latest findings, it's amazing how much social interaction with other people will actually help you to enrich what you're doing.
In this part of the library, the grown-ups can read the stories to the children.
People sometimes say to me, aren't libraries obsolete? It's absurd. They are nerve centers, centers of intellectual energy.
Libraries stand for an ideal, which is an educated public. And to the degree that knowledge is power, they also stand therefore for the idea that power should be disseminated and not centralized.
The first appeal of Google's enterprise when we saw it was just digitizing millions and millions of books. At Harvard, we have by far the greatest university library in the world. It's enormous, 17 million volumes. And every library wants its holdings digitized for lots of reasons, including preservation. But beyond that, it raises the possibility of sharing your intellectual wealth. I think of the Harvard Library as an international asset, something that should be opened up and shared with the general population. So here comes Google. They've got the energy, they've got the technology, they've got the money, and they said, we'll do it for you. free.
Google did such a fabulous job in creating a vision, not only that a universal digital library could be created, but that it could be done today. The Google engineers are like good engineers everywhere. They just like to think about how do we surmount these challenges. They sort of leave the lawsuit to the lawyers to worry about.
Google's a company that believes in its fundamental mission of empowering everyone in this world with all the information they need. Enriched with the right information, people can make better decisions for themselves, their families, and their communities. This world is full of wonderful individuals which have varied needs, from a farmer in Africa to a mother in India to a business person in Japan. Everyone needs information in this modern day and age, and Google believes in breaking all the barrier between every individual and the information they seek.
When you actually negotiate with Google and do so on their turf, you enter a strange world. A Google office doesn't have chairs like this chair. The furniture consists of large inflated balls that are colored green or red or yellow, and the young Google engineers are sitting on these. It's a kind of Never-Never-Land feeling.
About 10 years ago, I got a visit from the vice president of Google, and she walked into my office and described a project that Google had in mind, which was to digitize all the books in the Harvard Library. My first thought was, to put it bluntly, that maybe they were smoking something, because I didn't think it was possible. Harvard had been digitizing books from time to time, but they were very limited in number, and we didn't do many. It was a very expensive and complicated project. I don't remember exactly, but it was several $100s just for a single book. But they had invented a copying station that was a lot cheaper and easier to use, that didn't damage the books, or at least went out of its way not to damage the books. And it seemed to me that it had a lot of plausibility, and so we decided to give it a try.
Every great library did digitizing, sometimes on a large scale. Our Open Collections program digitized 2.3 million pages. I mean, that's big, but nothing like as big as what Google attempted to do. The sheer ambition of digitizing everything.
In the ancient world, at the Library of Alexandria, they copied rolls and tablets, and it attempted to copy all that was known. And eventually the library was destroyed by Julius Caesar. And the loss of the Library of Alexandria was an international catastrophe.
The Universal Library has been talked about for millennia. There's a kind of a continuity of development, and we mustn't forget the important role that libraries and scholars have always made for millennia of copying. And then you see with the development of printing, the multiplicity of texts, the copying of original texts. It was possible to think in the Renaissance that you might be able to amass the whole of published knowledge in a single room or a single institution.
Sous mes yeux, j'ai un monument de la pensée française, la grande encyclopédie. Les deux maîtres de l'initiative, outre les autres fameux philosophes, ce sont Diderot et d'Alembert. Ils ont voulu ramasser toute la connaissance du moment et le donner à connaître au service de la liberté de penser, au service de la liberté de conscience. Je crois que l'encyclopédie nous parle de ce qui a été un moment de la conscience française, au milieu du XVIIIe siècle, à la fin de la monarchie absolue, en préparation de ce mouvement de la pensée qui a conduit à la Révolution française.
Then in the 19th century, you have various suggestions in France and Belgium that you can create a catalogue of everything. What will come next is microfilm. And so you start finding huge microfilming projects. And so for us, the Google project was a sort of a natural extension of that process of development.
Project Gutenberg of Michael Hart was the first digital library. He started in the 4th of July in early 1970s, going and typing the Declaration of Independence so that everybody could have access to it. Thousands of volunteers worked from all over the world to go and build this.
He even had the idea that it ought to be possible to download the entire library that he had created if you wanted it. And I think it did act as a kind of example of something that later on Google and others took up in a much bigger, more extensive way.
My name is Raymond Kurzweil, and I'm from Queens, New York.
When I was 12, I became fascinated with pattern recognition. And as a young teenager, I did a project to teach computers how to recognize patterns in music.
I built a computer, and by feeding in certain relationships in music, I was able to write music with it.
Raymond, how old are you?
I'm 17.
Do your parents know what you've been up to?
Recognizing printed letters was a classical unsolved problem in the field of pattern recognition. And so I created the first omnifont optical character recognition. This was around 1975. 1978, we developed a commercial version. And we talked about how you could ultimately scan all books and all printed material.
When automobiles came along first, they seemed likely to become a rich man's monopoly. They cost upward of £1,000. Henry Ford automobiled that. He put the poor man on the road. We want a Henry Ford today to modernize the distribution of knowledge, make good knowledge cheap and easy in this still very ignorant, ill-educated, ill-served, English-speaking world of ours, which might be the greatest power on earth for the good of mankind.
We started the Internet Archive in 1996. The idea was to have all the published works of humankind available to everybody, that this was the opportunity of our generation, that, like the previous generation had put a man on the moon. The Internet Archive had been completely open with Google. In fact, I'd gone and given a speech that was attended by, I think, all of the senior executives on how one could go about building a digital library of all books, music, video. And I had hoped that there was going to be a way to work with them, but that was not to be. Libraries had signed secret agreements with Google. We didn't know what was really going on. But when they started coming out as a completely separate project and not working with others, then I started to become suspicious.
Larry Page, who founded Google with me, first proposed that we digitize all books a decade ago, when we were a fledgling startup. 5 years later, in 2004, Google Books was born. Despite a number of important digitization efforts to date, none have been at a comparable scale, simply because no one else has chosen to invest the requisite resources. If Google Books is successful, others will follow.
I don't think that Google is aware of the fact that it's a corporation. I think Google does think of itself as an NGO that just happens to make a lot of money. And they think of themselves as social reformers who just happen to have their stock traded on stock exchanges and who just happen to have investors and shareholders, but they do think of themselves as ultimately being in the business of making the world better.
There are few more irreparable property losses than vanished books. Nature, politics, and war have always been the mortal enemies of written works. Most recently, Hurricane Katrina dealt a blow to the libraries of the Gulf Coast. At Tulane University, the main library sat in 9 feet of water. In the 1970s, the Khmer Rouge regime in Cambodia decimated cultural institutions throughout the country. Khmer Rouge fighters took over the National Library, throwing the books into the street, burning them, while using the stacks as a pigsty. Now with Google, the University of Michigan is involved in one of the most extensive preservation projects in world history.
Google Books is a potent idea on a number of dimensions. What I like about Google Books is the idea of not losing books, especially books that might be genuinely abandoned. The idea of getting all that stuff online is, of course, going to be a benefit. So that we have to love.
I went to Google in January 2003. I actually made what now I feel quite embarrassed about. I made a presentation to them, telling them what they ought to be doing, only to find out a few months later that they'd actually been doing it for a while already. Project Ocean was the kind of code name, development code name, that Google were giving to what eventually became Google Books. So it was called Project Ocean because it was big, I imagine. Google seemed to think that they could do almost 1 million in 3 years.
You could say that this mass digitization is something like running a huge machine through a library. You take books by the shelf, they're put in cartons, on carts, they're loaded onto trucks, and then Google at this time had 3 places in the country where it was doing digitization. Supposedly, it didn't give the address of where they were.
Google won't say how much scanning all the books cost, but there are estimates that it's somewhere between $30 and $100 per book. So if you multiply that times 20 million.
Google early on bent over backwards to keep us from communicating with the other libraries. There were 3 or 4 large ones, and each of us was told we should not tell the others what kind of a contract we had and how we were working with Google.
To begin with, it had to be kept fairly quiet. It was probably mid-2003 when I started to take the wraps off in terms of this is going to be a possibility that we might be working with Google. I witnessed the scale of the operation, and it was very impressive. 20 very large workstations with very high resolution cameras sitting on top of a cradle with very intense lights, and underneath a lot of black boxes which presumably contained all of Google's algorithms that makes Google search what it is. And they uploaded that stuff straight to Mountain View, straight from Oxford.
Google certainly depends on knowing more and more and more for their algorithm to be better and better and better. And this is the core of the way economics in this space now works.
They had a specific interest in having lots of things in Google that would lead people to use Google so they could make money by having advertisements there.
What are books? They're full of data, and so the more data you have, the more you can fine-tune your search technologies.
Some of the enthusiasts for Google's way of gathering data, and it's not just Google at all, I mean, it's Silicon Valley in general. It's the current cultural moment. It includes the other Silicon Valley companies, but also the modern world of finance and also the modern world of spycraft for states, and also the modern world of criminality and the modern world of insurance and healthcare. All these things have this idea that you grab all this data in order to become very powerful. You create a differential in your ability to see information versus the ordinary person, and you create these new incredible castles of power. But it's okay. It's not just traditional power mongering because you're making the world more efficient.
I was a little boy in the 70s, growing up in India, watching reruns of Star Trek on our family's black and white TV. And from those times, the picture of a Star Trek computer was deeply ingrained in my head. As a little boy, I was just fascinated by the fact that you can walk up to a computer and ask it, "Computer, what's the atmosphere of that planet?" That was just the most fascinating thing to a little boy. And from that day on, it was my dream to build that Star Trek computer. Only later would I grow up and realize it's really hard because computers don't understand language. And I went through this brief period of disbelief as a graduate student where I didn't think I would reach my dream in my lifetime. But thanks to Google and all the technologies that we have built here and what I see in the pipeline, I'm closer to my dream than ever.
Internet hace pocos años era un medio muy joven. Lo único que se podía encontrar en Internet es aquello creado y producido especialmente para Internet. Sin embargo, todo el acervo cultural, todo el conocimiento, todo el saber que el ser humano ha desarrollado a lo largo de la historia está en los libros. Claro, si los libros no estaban en Internet, las posibilidades de Internet como un medio de acceso a información, a conocimiento, eran limitadas. Una vez el producto se comenzó a desarrollar, nuestro objetivo era incorporar otro tipo de contenidos, editados más allá del mundo anglosajón, que estaban en las grandes bibliotecas a lo largo del mundo.
La Biblioteca de Montserrat té els seus inicis al segle XI, bàsicament quan ja van venir els primers monjos i van necessitar de seguida tenir uns llibres per la pregària, uns llibres per la lectura espiritual. Aquest és un dels llibres que s'ha digitalitzat en el projecte de Google, l'exercitatori espiritual del pare García de Cisneros, abat d'aquest monestir en el segle XVI, i va preparar uns exercicis en els quals és tot un itinerari per entrar en la vida cristiana en profunditat. A través d'internet hi ha la possibilitat de buscar contínuament una cosa darrere de l'altra, sense un aprofundiment en cada una de les coses que un consulta. En aquest cas, aquest llibre seria com una crida d'atenció per no passar a un curs o un córrer d'una pàgina a una altra sense un aprofundiment personal espiritual. Hem pogut digitalitzar en aquest projecte Google uns 23.400 o coses així de llibres. Ens va semblar que era una facilitar la difusió de la cultura. Per nosaltres és una satisfacció que això sigui accessible a tothom.
Google no va pagar res per digitalitzar els llibres. Ho trobeu just? Vull dir, què passa si algun dia algú fa negoci o es beneficia d'això? Una pregunta massa difícil, potser, o no?
Potser sí, és que no tinc elements per entrar en altre tema que el que comporta la digitalització i la facilitat de que aquests llibres siguin consultats des de lluny estant.
Google were and are free to do what they want with the scans. And why should that concern us? I mean, part of our ethos and part of our objective as a library is to make the information that's contained in our library available as free of charge as we can possibly make it to anybody who needs it. And if Google is going to do that on a larger scale, that's fine. If they are going to make money out of it down the line, why not? You know, they've invested a lot of money in it. There's no such thing as a free lunch.
Who wouldn't want to have all of the world's knowledge available to everyone on the planet? The problem is that Google, as an intermediary in this process, has certain interests and has a certain agenda that is not always transparent.
If you're in Silicon Valley, you have another job, which is you're building this new life form that's going to take over the world, and Google is providing the memories for its brain, or the other companies are providing the memories. And this is something that's openly talked about.
It's all human knowledge, in books and out of books, woven together into a single entity that's accessible by anybody, anywhere in the world, anytime. And that all knowledge is transformative. It just really kicks up the civilization in our society into another level.
Shortly after the launch of Google Books, in different events, I ran into Larry Page and Sergey Brin and had this brief exchange with them about the potential. And there was a characteristic Google founder response, which was a kind of glint in their eyes and a smile, and the sense that this was just the beginning of something much bigger than even you at this point can imagine.
At Harvard, we only permitted Google to digitize books in the public domain, but the other research libraries that Google first went to permitted Google to digitize books covered by copyright. As soon as you get into the copyright area, things get rapidly complicated.
We're allowing Google to scan all of our books, those in the public domain and those still in copyright. We believe it is legal, ethical, and a noble endeavor that will transform our society. Legal, because we believe copyright law allows us fair use of the millions of books that are being digitized.
Fair use is a piece of American copyright law that allows us to make copies without asking any permission, without paying any fee for certain carved out uses.
I happen to think Google's fair use defense is strong. One of the things that courts have done over the last decade or so is decided that search engines who routinely make copies of information are making fair uses when they do it in order to help people find information that they're looking for. One of the things Google has done is provide links to places where you can buy the book.
They scanned, but they did not release the copy. You could not search except for keywords. You could not see a page except for snippets. They were trying to allow indexing and searching without allowing people to get copies.
And we will protect all copyrighted materials, your work, in that archive. Let me repeat that. I guarantee you we will protect all copyrighted materials. I assure you, we understand that providing public access to materials and copyright, particularly those still in print, would be unlawful.
One of the things that you need to understand about Google is that they try to roll out projects first and then to think about the consequences later. So you would often see them experiment with something that looks very cool. It may be the Google Street View project.
Google launched Street View in 2007, part of the search engine's long-term goal to create a virtual 3D map of the whole planet, right down to street level. But investigations have revealed that Google's Street View cars were collecting more than just photographs for their databanks. Their antennas were also hoovering up personal information from unencrypted Wi-Fi networks, including internet history and passwords.
I think the case of Google collecting Wi-Fi information, it reveals a complete lack of respect for privacy within the corporation. Such projects often reveal that Google does not fully understand the social consequences of its own work.
We actually do more search queries in China alone than any other search company does in any other single national market, by which I really mean Google in the United States. So we certainly do aspire to be a world brain. I think H.G. Wells was, he's well known for having been quite prescient about a lot of the things that he envisioned. Sure, we don't have a time machine yet, but pretty much the rest of it was dead on. We have a product which is a very, very popular product. It's called Baidu Wenku. The Chinese name of it is the Baidu Library. It allows people to upload materials that they have that are either of their own creation or that they have the intellectual property rights to our site.
我们都是给那个北京各大高校还有个别的教授进行扫描的。一天一个人能扫30本左右，对，数量是每年都在增加的。然后一开始我们是只加工图书，现在扩展到就是以前只加工中文嘛，现在有外文的，还有期刊的。然后一开始是加工的只在北京这有这一个点儿，后来慢慢扩展，现在全国有17个加工点儿。因为扫描完了能存储数据，存储更多的数据就是相当于一种资源。
There isn't an area of human knowledge that hasn't been filled out and made more rich and wondrous by the fact of the internet. I'm often just sort of shocked at people who see it as the beginnings of this sort of dystopian future. I embrace it unequivocally.
The fundamental knowledge system, which accumulates, sorts, keeps in order, and renders available everything that is known, centers on Barcelona with its 17 million active workers. It is the memory of mankind.
Doncs aquí veieu el supercomputador, que es diu Mare Nostrum. Són 10.000 CPUs, són com uns 10.000 portàtils dels que teniu, tots juntets, molt ben posats, amb la seva memòria, el seu disc. Està canviant el nostre dia a dia, la nostra manera de treballar, interaccionar.
You can look at the internet as something divine. We eventually will come, I think, to revere some of our technological creations like the internet to be almost like cathedrals of redwoods, to be as complicated and as beautiful as natural creations, and that in a real sense that there is more of God in a cell phone than there is in a tree frog, because a cell phone is an additional layer of evolution over the natural frog.
Les grans empreses estan acumulant una informació nostra que fins i tot informació que no en som ni conscients i que l'estan usant i la poden usar pels seus interessos. Les dades és un dels temes que ara comencen a ser el coll d'ampolla. És un problema com emmagatzemar aquestes dades, com s'ha fet fins ara no ens serveix, i de fet s'està fent recerca amb mètodes, no només d'emmagatzemar, sinó de com gestionar això que estàs preguntant tu, com fer-ho. De nou, s'ha de fer amb una nova filosofia totalment, i és part de la recerca que es fa en aquest centre, precisament és això.
It's a new form of medieval church or something like that. Everybody is to give their data in service of worship of this new digital God, and I think it's really, really dumb.
I té algun tipus de significat que estigui aquest ordinador enmig d'una església?
És casualitats d'aquelles que passen a la vida, no? Jo crec que ha estat un encert. Jo crec que, de fet, ara mateix no és l'ordinador més ràpid del món, però continua sent l'ordinador més maco del món.
It's not unique to this era. You can look at previous technologies, whether it was radio, whether it was television, whether it was the telegraph, whether it was electricity. You do have many similar hopes that those technologies will bring universal communication, people would talk to one another, there will be peace everywhere, education will spread globally. A lot of similar hopes have been expressed in connection to earlier technologies. So this is nothing new, but I think there is something about the scale at which projects and groups and various companies and organizations now are putting those cyber-utopian beliefs to work that is different now than from what it was before.
Science fiction never imagined Google. Google is a game-changing tool on the order of the equally handy Flint hand axe. But Google is not ours. We are its unpaid content providers in one way or another. We generate product for Google, our every search a minuscule contribution. Google is made of us, a sort of coral reef of human minds and their products. We have yet to take Google's measure.
J'ai eu l'occasion de connaître un ou deux représentants de Google. Ils sont même venus me voir. J'ai trouvé des jeunes gens très, très propres sur eux. Visiblement, ils avaient abandonné leur jean pour mettre des cravates parce qu'ils pensaient qu'en Europe, c'était mieux. Et ils avaient une espèce de mélange d'arrogance et d'esprit commercial brutal. Figurez-vous qu'ils ont tellement mal compris notre psychologie qu'ils m'ont apporté un petit cadeau. C'était, je me rappelle, une espèce de petite théière qui permettait d'avoir du thé chaud quand vous vous promeniez en train. J'ai regardé ces jeunes gens, j'ai laissé tomber le cadeau et tout à coup j'ai vu dans leur regard qu'ils s'étaient, en bons commerciaux, rendu compte qu'ils s'étaient trompés sur la nature de la cible commerciale que j'étais. C'était assez bizarre comme conception qu'ils pouvaient avoir du président de la Bibliothèque nationale de France.
I do think that Google genuinely wants to make all of the world's information organized and available to people throughout the globe. I do think that they genuinely believe in that mission. But they also happen to believe that nothing will get lost and no one will get harmed if it's Google who will implement that mission. And I think it's normal. If they didn't trust themselves to do it, then they would be, they would have some weird schizophrenic problem. They don't trust themselves to implement their own project.
Le défi posé par l'annonce tonitruante de Google, son intention de faire une bibliothèque universelle, et de la faire seule en fait, ce défi était si clair que la réponse s'est imposée très vite, avec autant de clarté. Quelques jours après, en effet, ayant réuni mes équipes, bibliothécaires, techniciens, à la Bibliothèque nationale, je me suis dit qu'il fallait dessiner une contre-offensive. Oui, une contre-offensive. C'est pourquoi j'ai publié cet article dans Le Monde, sous le titre que j'ai choisi, « Quand Google défie l'Europe ». Quand Google défie l'Europe, j'ai gardé le même titre ensuite pour le livre que j'ai publié. Ce que l'on trouvait quand on tapait Victor Hugo, ou quand on tapait Cervantes, ou quand on tapait Goethe, ce qui m'a frappé, c'est que sur 20 entrées, il y en avait 19 qui étaient en anglais. Alors évidemment, cela a été corrigé ensuite, je le sais bien. Mais disons que néanmoins, cela mettait en alerte.
One of the concerns which came out, as you would expect from France, was that this was really part of a plot in the United States to make English the universal language. And as we know, the most important thing about France, aside from its wine, is its language. And there was a real sense that who were we to be digitizing all those books in English? And I remember some correspondence about the fact that we at Harvard were not just digitizing English books, but were digitizing a very large number of books in French, to which, if I remember correctly, the response came back, who are you to digitize books in French?
C'est une bataille, on se bat, c'est un combat toujours, il n'y a rien de dépréciatif dans l'expression de combat, il y a de nobles batailles, de nobles combats.
First, we learned that Google was scanning books. And I remember loving that idea because I'm a reader and I write nonfiction books and I do research and I wanted access to those books. Then we heard that they were scanning our books. They were scanning copyrighted books and they hadn't asked anyone's permission. The libraries had just handed them over. Well, that was obviously a violation of our copyrights and a little bit of a surprise, to put it mildly.
I remember being very curious about what they were doing, and I popped my name into Google and saw that it came up with snippets of my book. So what I did was I searched for terms that I knew were common in the book, like star or galaxy. And there were lots and lots of hits, and it would display several snippets, and then I would search for other common words. And it was clear that if you were clever about your searches, you could see quite a bit of the text, if not all of it.
The problem that most authors have is obscurity. That's the issue. There are a gazillion books. How do you get people to pay attention to yours?
Google claimed that its use of these millions of copyrighted books that it had digitized was an example of fair use. Why? I'm not sure. I still don't understand how that can be justified. The point is that the entire book has been copied, and it's been copied by a single company that's doing it for purposes of profiting off the work. If you allow a profit-making company to copy 1 million books, then how can you say no to the next enterprise that also wants to copy the 1 million books? So the Authors Guild organized a class action suit asking them to stop doing that.
The Authors Guild on Tuesday filed a lawsuit against search engine Google, alleging that its scanning and digitizing of library books constitutes a massive copyright infringement. The Authors Guild represents more than 8,000 authors and is the largest society of published writers in the United States.
When Google made its decision to scan these millions of books, it certainly realized that depending upon how litigation developed, this could be a bet the company decision, because copyright liability in the United States can be quite extreme, $150,000 per copyrighted work. And depending on the number of copyrighted works at stake, it could be in the billions of dollars.
The Association of American Publishers has filed a lawsuit against Google, alleging the internet company's plan to scan and digitally distribute the text of major library collections would violate copyright protections.
I think the issue of copyright is an archaic, unproductive view. When you create something, you're building on the work of other people, no matter who you are, whether you're J.K. Rowling or Shakespeare. You're basing your work on the work of others. You're basically taking their ideas. Artist does not own their ideas. No artist does.
Any useful information exists because of the efforts of real people. And copyright is our way of remembering who those people are. And it's crucial to not lose that. And I think cyber culture is missing the point of copyright. You might say, well, who cares about authors? Let a few authors not make as much money as they would have. But it's a precedent. The whole internet will become a tool for the concentration of power, and that would be a disaster.
The internet is the world's largest copy machine, and anything that touches it is being copied. And that just to transmit something along the way, people are making copies of things. Copies are valueless. They have no worth at all. And so there's a focus on copies because that's an industrial age artifact.
Im Jahre 2007 mir auffiel, dass eben eine ganze Menge Bücher von uns dort in der Google Book Search digitalisiert werden, ohne dass wir gefragt worden sind. Und dann stellte sich raus, dass alleine in dem Verlag, in dem ich publiziere, über 200 Bücher, ohne dass irgendeine Erlaubnis eingeholt worden ist von Google, eingescannt worden sind. Es handelt sich um eine seriöse Firma, die aber gleichzeitig in einer Masse illegale Sachen macht, dass es allein aufgrund der Masse den Anschein hat, als sei es legal. Das Jahr 2007 verstrich. Ich schrieb meinen Aufsatz, der sich nicht nur um die rechtlichen Probleme drehte, sondern auch um die Frage, in welcher hundsmiserablen Qualität die Bücher dort eingescannt worden sind. Ja, also dass sie immer die Hände von irgendwelchen Scannenden noch mit abgebildet haben, dass ein Drittel der Seiten irgendwie kaputt ist. Ja, sie können faktisch damit gar nichts anfangen. Im Grunde kann man sagen, sie bauen sozusagen sie machen ein ganz filigranes Kunstwerk, bei dem es sozusagen auf jede Einzelheit drauf ankommt. Und das, was dann sozusagen in der Google Book Search dabei rauskommt, ist, wie wenn sie dieses Kunstwerk sozusagen durch einen Fleischwolf gedreht hätten. Ja?
A book is really a plateau that a person reaches to say, this is my testament, this is what I can offer. A book is not just an extra long tweet. A book is something that's hard to do, it's hard to finish, it's hard to publish. It's a certain achievement of scale. It's a declaration of this is what my life has learned, this is what I can offer. And that is not something that can be dissected, and the little minced pieces simply can't mean the same thing.
The lawsuits were commenced in the fall of 2005. And within 6 months, the Authors Guild and the publishers came to Google with a proposal about settling the lawsuit.
I was sitting innocently in my office, and a lawyer for the university appeared, and he said, "You are about to take a non-disclosure oath." Well, I'd never had anything to do with lawyers except once in my life when I made a will, and I thought, oh, I'm in deep water now. What is this all about? Well, it turned out that there were secret negotiations between Google on the one hand and the Authors Guild and the Association of American Publishers on the other. They were suing Google for infringement of copyright. And as happens frequently with suits, they began to negotiate a settlement. Well, we were not part of that at Harvard. However, we had to be informed about it because we had the books.
It took 3 years to work it out because there were a lot of issues to be discussed. There were publishers at the table as well as authors, and publishers and authors did not have identical interests. There were libraries not at the table but very much in the picture. They were talking to Google away from the room. And I'm not sure how much I can say. I definitely cannot talk specifically about the negotiations because I signed a non-disclosure agreement, which I'm told is still in force, and I don't want to go to jail.
Google's long-running legal battle with the U.S. publishing industry came to an unexpected halt this morning as the parties announced a settlement that will see both sides cooperate on online access to copyrighted books. Google have agreed to pay $125 million in the settlement. $34.5 million of that sum will go towards the establishment of a rights-collecting body for digital books. $45 million has been set aside to compensate writers whose copyrighted books Google has already scanned. They will get around $60 per book. The largest portion of the settlement, $45.5 million, will go just on the legal fees. But the most striking aspect of the agreement is that it turns Google into a bookseller, selling online access to out-of-print but still in copyright works.
For those of you who don't know the details of the settlement agreement, it's 385 pages. It has 46 sections of definitions. It's got 15 sections on Google's obligations. It's got 9 sections on the economic terms. It's got 6 sections on libraries' obligations. So this is not a little 3 or 4 page memorandum of understanding that we're talking about here. This is a very heavily negotiated agreement.
So how many people have not read the 334 pages? Okay.
We proposed something that was a little bit outside the box, and that was, if money is being made, share the money with the rights holders. It couldn't be simpler. So I thought it would be pretty non-controversial. That apparently was naive of me.
I personally became increasingly disenchanted with what originally looked like a great idea. They basically transformed the search service into a gigantic commercial enterprise. They really thought they would digitize every book in existence and make it available for a price everywhere.
the settlement would allow Google to have essentially a license to commercialize all books that are out of print. There were certainly hundreds of thousands and probably millions of books for whom, even if they were in copyright, no author, no publisher, no rights holder would come forward. And those books are orphans, and Google would be able to commercialize those, and nobody else would.
A monopoly was being created, a monopoly of access to knowledge. Did we want the greatest library that would ever exist to be in the hands of one giant corporation, which could really charge almost anything it wanted for access to it?
It's not a library, it's a bookstore, and sell it as a bookstore if you want, but don't pretend that it's a library.
When I talk to people in the publishing industry, they find it humorous because it's like, well, they're orphaned for a reason. And that, in fact, if we suddenly found this gold mine where the future of the book are the orphan books, okay, then boy, those publishers sure aren't very smart.
Our principal concern here today in this discussion is that under the proposed settlement, Google would be the only entity that could treat copyright as an opt-out mechanism. Everyone else would have to treat it as opt-in. There are other problems with this proposed settlement.
Listed below are various potential revenue streams for Google as identified within the settlement: institutional subscriptions, consumer purchases, advertising uses, public access service, print on demand, custom publishing, PDF downloads, consumer subscription model, summaries, abstracts, compilations of books. That's what you're going to end up with at a minimum. Sure. But what I'm saying to you, Mr. Drummond, does this in fact place Google at such a tremendous advantage in disregard of what has been historically copyright law? How do you respond to those concerns?
As of today, we have zero market share in any sort of books. So we're a new entrant to the market. So far from being someone who's controlling the market, we're not even in it yet, and we're trying to get in there.
They thought that all we have to do is kind of announce this to the world, and the world will go, God, what a great agreement. And for a while, some people did, but then you started reading the agreement really carefully, and there were lots of questions. The problem was there was nothing in the agreement that respected the privacy of the people who were looking at the books. Google was going to be keeping track of who exactly was reading that book, how long they were reading it, and what they read next. That information could get back to the government, could get back to the FBI, could get back to police, could get back to their employer. Because Google wasn't making any kind of guarantees about what they were going to do in respect of this privacy.
If people find that the privacy policies of a particular technology are not to their liking, they should unplug it. They should retreat from the internet. They should cut off their phone lines and they should go up and hide in a mountain. They have that choice.
Wells's conception of the world vein was that it was intended to have a power of surveillance over mankind. Information gathered and organized in such a way that we had an eye that could actually survey everything that was going on. It would be able to register where everybody was, everywhere they went, potentially all the transactions that they were engaged in. And he seemed to think this is likely to be a good thing.
It was a gradual process of getting to know the details of Google Book Search, and it was the cumulative effect of these details that made me feel this project was actually something that I myself could not recommend to the president and fellows of Harvard as something that we should enthusiastically support.
H.G. Wells' idea of the world brain was a dictatorship of technologists and intellectuals. These are the geeks of their day. And gradually he saw their power would spread from laboratory to laboratory, from university to university. These people with the expertise began to coalesce into sort of almost like managerial groups that would mean that we don't need the politicians and the conflicts and the noise, the confusion, the babble. But for the world brain, there was to be a further component, and this is the component that is what disturbs me. It's that how that would be used to achieve the ultimate goals of civilization as it appears to have been evolving towards.
Die Snippets sind nur die Oberfläche. Ja? Die Frage ist, was macht eine Firma mit den von mir hergestellten Daten? Dazu braucht sie gar keine Oberfläche. Verstehen Sie, wenn die meine Texte in ihre Datenbank einführen, sie haben noch nicht mal ein Webinterface, das ist auch schon illegal. Verstehen Sie? Weil sie das zu gewerblichen Zwecken machen und nicht für ihren Privatgebrauch.
It's going to change how we interface with information.
People are going to ask, how did it do that? How did it accomplish this task, which before we thought only humans could ever hope to do?
David Hume held this view that sense and experience are the sole foundation of knowledge. Watson.
What is empiricism?
After IBM's success with Deep Blue, they looked around for other kinds of games that they could take on. And they wanted something that was a very different kind of game than chess. And so they picked Jeopardy, which is basically a fancy trivia game. It's one of those games that you and I can play.
It's a human standing there with their carbon and water versus the computer with all of its silicon and its main memory and its disk.
After Germany invaded the Netherlands, this queen, her family, and cabinet fled to London. Maria.
Who is Beatrix?
No. Watson.
Who is Wilhelmina?
That is correct. This U.S. president negotiated the Treaty of Portsmouth, ending the Russo-Japanese War. Watson.
Who is Theodore Roosevelt?
Good for $800.
I did talk to Larry Page when Google first started because I was really perplexed about why would anybody make a new search engine when we had Alta Vista, which was the current search engine. It seemed good enough. And he said, oh, it's not to make a search engine, it's to make an AI.
Most of my discussions have been with Larry Page. We've talked in general about their quest to digitize all knowledge and then develop true AI. I mean, we can create intelligent systems if you have very large databases. And books are actually probably more valuable than all the other stuff on the internet because we have a high standard for what we put in books. The computer industry and its implications in terms of information technology is a multi-trillion-dollar part of the economy. It will be, the basis of everything we do in the future.
What Watson showed was you can take a very large, very messy set of data, and if you can use those inputs correctly, you can actually answer really sophisticated questions. And certainly the presence of large amounts of data on the internet is going to be as much an input for machines as it is for people.
What we really will need to tap that is computer systems that can understand natural language. And natural language understanding is actually coming along very well. IBM's Watson is a very good example of the current state of the art in computers understanding natural language. Because not only did Watson have to understand the convoluted language in the Jeopardy query, which includes metaphors and similes and puns and riddles and jokes, but it got its knowledge to respond to the query from actually reading 200 million pages of natural language documents, including all of Wikipedia and several other encyclopedias.
And when you see a computer play it better than we ever could, it's one of those moments where you realize, oh yes, the world really is different.
An IBM supercomputer named Watson has won the first ever Jeopardy quiz show competition, starring a computer as a player.
The Google Book Project is, in a sense, trying to make that universal library which could then be read by an AI or a Watson-like supercomputer.
By 2045, we'll have expanded, according to my calculations, the intelligence and capability of the human-machine civilization 1 billion-fold. So that's such a profound transformation, such a singular transformation, that we call it the singularity. Now, this is not yet inside my body or brain. It may as well be. I'm very dependent on it. I think this is part of who I am. Ultimately, this kind of device will be the size of blood cells and will go inside our body to keep us healthy, go inside our brains, put our brains directly on the internet, give us direct access to the entire library of all books.
AI is just a religion. It doesn't matter. What's really happening is real-world examples from real people who entered their answers, their trivia, their experiences into some online database is actually just a giant puppet theater repackaging inputs from real people who are forgotten. We're pretending they aren't there. This is something I really want people to see, that the insane structure of modern finance is exactly the same as the insane structure of modern culture on the internet. They're precisely the same. It's an attempt to gather all the information into a high castle, optimize the world, and pretend that all the people the information came from don't deserve anything. That it's all the same mistake.
Google search is going to be assisted intelligence and not artificial intelligence. In my mind, I think of search as this beautiful symphony between the user and the search engine, and we make music together.
Wir haben publiziert eigentlich seit 1995 verschiedene Arten von Handschriften von Kafka, möglichst genau. Das hat eine der Hauptinteressen, die Kafka verfolgt hat, ist die der Spannung sozusagen des Individuums gegenüber Institutionen und Apparaten, die sozusagen das Individuum zu lenken versuchen.
Before the law, there stands a God. A man comes from the country, begging admittance to the law.
Also in dieser berühmten Türhütergeschichte sagt ja der Türhüter, also der scheinbar die Macht innehat, zu dem Mann vom Lande, also dem Deppen im Grunde, der halt feige ist, auch sich nicht auskennt und so weiter, der sagt, merke aber, ich bin mächtig. Und nur, dass er das sagt, nur sozusagen dieser Sprechakt, dass er das sagt, der produziert überhaupt erst die Macht. Das heißt, die Frage, ob das tatsächlich Macht ist, die der ausüben kann, so, die kann man ja im Grunde nur durch die Handlung tatsächlich verifizieren oder falsifizieren.
The man tries to peer through the entrance. He had been taught that the law should be accessible to every man. Do not attempt to enter without my permission, says the God.
Eigentlich nur ein kleiner Schritt von Kafka zu der Konfrontation mit der Google Book Search.
This tale is told during the story called The Trial.
I've been surprised at the level of controversy there, because digitizing the world's books and making them available, there's nobody else who's attempted it at our scale or who is really working on it. So, and I feel like we had a number of technical challenges which we've overcome. There was this legal dispute which we have settlements proposed, at least that we jointly agreed to with the authors and publishers and so forth. But anyway, it remains somewhat controversial. So yeah, I'm surprised at the amount of resistance that's had, but ultimately I'm optimistic that we're going to be successful.
It's important to understand that the Google Book settlement was negotiated by a small number of people claiming to represent authors and claiming to represent publishers. But not every author and not every publisher was in the room. So once the settlement's announced, there's a 6-month period in which it's required to notify them about the terms of the settlement and give them a chance to opt out if they don't like the settlement, or to give them a chance to object to the terms of the settlement.
Das Google Book Settlement hat, wie ich dann eben relativ schnell begriffen habe, Auswirkungen gehabt auf die Rechtssituation in der Bundesrepublik Deutschland. Und das fand ich völlig unstatthaft. Ja, dazu ist dann hier gar nicht verhandelt worden. Und daraufhin haben wir eben beschlossen, dass wir zum einen einen öffentlichen Aufruf machen. Das war der Heidelberger Appell. Und wir hatten innerhalb sozusagen 2-3 Wochen so gut wie alle wichtigen Autoren. Also später ist Hertha Müller dann mit dem Nobelpreis geehrt worden. Die trat da auf. Herr Grass hat dort unterschrieben. Und dadurch bekam das Ganze sowas wie einen Schneeballeffekt.
Egal ob dicker Wälzer oder dünnes Büchlein, immer öfter gibt es die Lieblingslektüre in voller Länge auch im Internet zu lesen. Bei Google zum Beispiel sind schon jetzt mehr als 10 Millionen Titel eingestellt und es sollen noch mehr werden. Das aber stört viele europäische Autoren gewaltig.
Raubkopierparadies, Internet, digitale Revolution, Revoluzzer-Mentalität, Zugriff für alle, gratis, immer und überall. Schon macht sich Google daran, unseren alten Traum von der Universalbibliothek zu verwirklichen. So schön es klingt, die totale Digitalisierung hätte womöglich große Verlierer.
Das Ziel war, die deutsche Regierung dahin zu bringen, dass sie sich politisch auf irgendeine Art und Weise dazu verhält.
Für die Bundesregierung ist klar, das Urheberrecht muss auch im Internet seinen Platz finden. Deshalb lehnen wir es ab, dass ohne jeden urheberrechtlichen Schutz die Bücher einfach eingescannt werden, wie dies von Google gemacht wird. Die Bundesregierung wird hier viel Wert darauf legen, ihre urheberrechtlichen Positionen deutlich zu machen und damit den Autoren aus Deutschland auch einen Schutz zu gewähren.
C'est comme dans la brousse, vous savez, le feu qui s'est mis à prendre. Le feu a pris, meilleur des feux, et a commencé à courir. Et je dois dire que j'ai été pour cela aidé par le président de la République. Le président de la République, un ou deux de ses collaborateurs, ont eu l'idée que c'était un défi important.
Il n'est pas question de nous laisser déposséder de notre patrimoine au bénéfice d'un grand opérateur, aussi sympathique soit-il, aussi important soit-il, aussi américain soit-il.
The first time I realized Google scanned my book was 2009, November. Actually, my lawyer called me and he said, do you know your book be scanned by Google Book?
Search engine Google came under intense fire from Chinese authors, as is a digital library used to books written by Chinese authors or without permission.
The reader, they can search my book by the keyword and made maybe around 100 keyword. But I remember the most ridiculous keyword of my book is bed, B-E-D, and telephone. That's 2 words I remember and made me laugh. So this is not intellectual at all. Me and my lawyer decide to sue Google. My lawyer asked 60,000, something like that. My journalist friend said, I even don't want to tell people I know you. Why you ask such low money? So I wrote this blog at that night and I go sleep. When I wake up, it's like 400 messages at my blog said, damage this girl and this girl's bitch, blah, 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 blah. Really disgusting, horrible message. I become a public enemy after the Google said they will leave China. And also Chinese young people start to sending flower to the Google's office, which is made even my best friend, they confused. They said, is the government sending you to sue Google?
実際私自身がもう、今回の事件の被害者であると。で、本も、丸々一冊デジタルスキャンされていると、いうことが分かってからですね、より、詳細調べていくことにしたわけです。そこで分かったことというのが、Google が言うとこのスニペットというものは、その本の中の数行、2、3行が読めると いう触れ込みなわけですけれど、それはやはりその、欧米のその書物を元にした考え方で、つまり横書きのその本の、数行が読めるようにしていると。で実は自動的に日本の本でも、そのスニペットのやり方っていうやつを適用しているわけなんですけど、残念ながら日本語の書物っていうのは大半が縦書きだったりするわけです。なのでそのスニペットで表示されるものはこう文章として読むことができないと。だからつまりスニペットや Google が考えているそのスニペットのサービスというものが全く意味のないものになっていると。週刊プレイボーイっていう雑誌は表向きはそのなんていうんですか、若い女の子のヌード写真とかですね、いっぱい載ってるような、どちらかというとジャーナリズムとはあんまり、思われないような雑誌ではあるんですけれど、日本のプレイボーイ、アメリカのプレイボーイもそうなのかもしれませんけど、なんていうんですかね、すごいこう反骨精神を、持っているところがあってですね、どこも、やらなかい、からこそじゃあうちがやろうかと、いうようなハートを持った雑誌だったから、この話に付き合ってくれたと僕は思ってますし、逆にそのいやこれも明石お前じゃなきゃやれないよというふうにその編集者からですね、尻を叩かれて応援してもらうような形で、実際連載はスタートしました。
Before the court is the plaintiff's motion to approve the settlement as fair and reasonable. Numerous materials have been submitted. Did anyone count up the number of objections?
We have in the range of 500.
Thank you.
I flew to New York, and it was very exciting. There were 25 outside parties that made presentations to Judge Chin. And there were 500 objections for him to read. Judge basically said, I'm not going to rule from the bench, but people were hanging on every word.
This is a fascinating turning point, actually, in the whole history of knowledge and of access to knowledge. And it was being played out in a New York courtroom before Judge Denny Chin in the Southern Federal District Court of New York.
私たちはですね、万が一も入れないとまずいなということで、一番乗りです。一番端にこう、最前列にこう席を陣取ったわけなんですけど。
I confirm that one of my books has been digitally scanned by Google without my permission. Because this act is a clear violation of the copyright law of Japan, I have asked the Metropolitan Police Department of Japan to criminally charge Google and its CEO for this violation.
The court's decision was to a considerable extent going to determine the future of books, of digital books.
The proposed settlement results in a de facto monopoly on information and an intensification of media concentration on Google. As a result, the right of free access to information, as well as the existing cultural diversity in both Germany and Europe, will be usurped.
Would it be basically in the hands of commercial speculators whose responsibility was to their shareholders? Or would it be organized for the public good?
There was a risk of monopolization there that the Department of Justice saw.
The proposed settlement would establish a marketplace in which only one competitor would have authority to use a vast array of works.
The risk was that Google could basically hold the whole world hostage to the price of access to these books. And because no one else would have a license, no one else would have a corpus like the corpus they had, we'd have to pay whatever they wanted to charge.
The core concerns seem to be that this would diminish the availability to read books in private. That is not true. This service would be available at public libraries. You can walk into your neighborhood library. You can sit down at a free access terminal. Anonymously, you can search for and read a book.
And if you want to look at it at home, then what?
Well, if you want to look at it at home, that may present an issue. Here's the rub. This is a tension between requirements for security that are insisted on in order not to have these works be sort of freely disseminated.
In my view, the Google Book Search settlement is no different from the piracy cases in which the internet and digital technology are abused. I strongly urge the court to reject the proposed settlement.
I remember there being a Japanese writer there, and the language was very vivid. It was as though, as copyright was going to be swept away, and that copyright was going to be destroyed, and the approval of the settlement was going to, make the United States out of compliance with treaty obligations.
There's a real risk that should the court approve the settlement, members of the World Trade Organization will initiate settlement proceedings against the U.S. government. And if the U.S. government were to lose such proceedings, which is a very real possibility, our partners would be entitled to impose trade sanctions against the United States.
You don't use words like that very often. It wasn't kind of like, oh, gee, there are these issues and we're concerned about something. It was like, this violates a treaty. How can the judge do something that's going to violate a treaty? This is crazy.
I am not going to rule today. There's just too much to digest. I will reserve decision. There's much to think about.
All rise.
And then Judge Chin thought about it. He thought about it, and he thought about it.
Google という会社は、アメリカというその国の、まさにその、利益を世界中からかき集めてくるような、そういうトップ企業の一つだと思いますけれど、だからそこにやはり配慮してですね、政治的な判断が行われるかもしれないっていうような憶測が結構流れてたんです。
He took a very long time, and every morning I got up and I thought, what is Judge Chin going to announce his decision today? And when he finally did, I myself felt thrilled because the court actually refused to sanction the settlement. Then Google Book Search could not take place, at least according to Google's original business plan.
U.S. Circuit Judge Denny Chin said the creation of the Universal Library would benefit many but would simply go too far. Chin said the settlement of a class action lawsuit that the company reached with U.S. authors and publishers would grant Google significant rights to exploit entire books without permission of copyright owners. Chin also said the deal gives Google a significant advantage over competitors, and it would be rewarding it for engaging in wholesale copying of copyrighted works without permission.
Ich habe gedacht, ja, das ist eigentlich genau das, was ich mir vorgestellt habe. Also war nicht so, dass ich überrascht war oder so. Natürlich freut man sich, wenn das dann so kommt, ja. Aber ich kann jetzt auch nicht sagen, dass ich irgendwelche Sektgläser oder so aufgemacht habe, ja.
Je ne connais pas le juge Chin, mais j'ai salué dans son choix une preuve de remarquable indépendance de la justice américaine, puisque contre toute la formidable puissance financière de Google, il a affirmé tranquillement que les accords passés par cette firme de Mountain View étaient invalides, étaient infondés, étaient incongrus.
I think you could read the decision by Judge Chen as a defeat of the screen by the book, but this is a long war. This is one battle, and whatever triumph there might have been for books is going to be short-lived because the screen will ultimately triumph.
They spent several months trying to negotiate a new settlement. Couldn't reach a new settlement that was mutually acceptable, so they're going to have to go to trial.
Baidu, China's search engine giant, has been blamed by Chinese writers for participating in copyright violation. This is because the website offers free online excerpts of stories and books without the author's prior approval.
I think very late March or early April of 2011, we purged the site of about 2.8 million files that we believed might be copyright infringing within a period of 72 hours. I think a good number of them were books or chapters of books. We then implemented a rule where no one could upload anything of more than 1,000 Chinese characters without it being manually inspected for copyright infringement or automatically inspected for copyright infringement. The problem is that then people started uploading parts of books in 1,000 character increments so that they would avoid detection. So there are always people who want to abuse the system.
The question is, has Google already been able to make its search engine better because of the Google Books corpus and the scanning of 20 million books? I think the answer to that is yes.
The question of whether large internet companies are making our lives easier or gaining power over us, I think it presents the kind of false binary because they're doing both. I mean, if they were not making our lives easier, no one would be using their services. This is the tricky, complicated question that we'll have to face down the road. I mean, all of them are making our lives easier. I mean, they're making products cheaper, they're making our commute less bothersome and more exciting. Google will be supplying us with glasses that will augment reality and tell us about where our friends are in the city. They'll tell us the weather, they'll tell us everything. The question is, what would the trade-offs be? And no one has asked, what happens with all of the information that would pass through Google Glasses? I mean, surely it will be stored somewhere. Surely Google will not be discarding it because they will need to know what it is that I've seen yesterday so that they can customize what I see today even better. But then the question is, would the National Security Agency be able to go to Google and ask for that data? Ask for everything I've seen through my Google Glasses? And if that would be the case, then the question should be, do we actually want to have a society where citizens are wearing CCTV cameras on their heads?
Es lógico que mucha gente piense en Google o en Internet, por no personalizar en Google, como el gran hermano que todo lo va a controlar, ¿no? O siguiendo lo que Wells desarrolló en sus obras de ciencia ficción hace unos cuantos años. Pero las cosas son mucho más sencillas. Internet no es más que un medio que nos facilita a todos los ciudadanos mayor posibilidad de acceso a información, a ocio, a conocimiento.
Getting to a better system where people are rewarded for their information contributions to the world. Getting to that system from where we are, where people are expected to get by with less. That's going to be a hard transition, and they might involve government, but they might involve the big companies. And the reason why is that the big companies like Google and Amazon and all the rest are shooting themselves in the foot with what we're doing, because what we're doing is shrinking the economy. I mean, I don't know.
So my concern is not so much with the direction in which Google, or Facebook for that matter, want to take the world. My concern is with the fact that it's Google and Facebook taking us in that direction.
Da kann man nicht damit argumentieren, dass die Allgemeinheit beglückt wird. Wenn ich jetzt auf die Deutsche Bank gehe, das Geld raushole und auf der Straße verteile, ja, und sage, dann hole ich so und so viel Arbeitslose von der Straße runter, ja, und die ganzen Bettler, die gibt es dann gar nicht mehr. Es bleibt einfach ein Banküberfall. Verstehen Sie?
Our current policy is to open up the library and to make it part of this really very ambitious project, more ambitious, I think, than Google's, which we call the Digital Public Library of America. You know, I think that we owe a great deal to Google. I can't imagine that this digital public library of America would ever have gotten off the ground had Google not started to race ahead with its own version of digitization on this massive scale. However, you know, Google, wonderful as it is not familiar with the books. For example, Walt Whitman's famous book of poems, Leaves of Grass, was catalogued under gardening.
J'ai été très attentif à ce que ça n'apparaisse pas comme une sorte de réaction chauvine, une réaction française. Vous savez, le coq gaulois qui se dresse sur ses ergots parce qu'il est tellement triste qu'au XVIIIe siècle, Louis XV ait abandonné l'Amérique et ensuite Napoléon la Louisiane. Bien sûr, en face, certains ont prétendu pour ne pas répondre à mes arguments. Mais ça n'était pas ça. J'ai souhaité que ce soit une action européenne, que projetant une bibliothèque qui réponde à Google, je l'ai fait en proposant le nom Europeana.
We're designing the Digital Public Library of America so that it will be perfectly compatible with Europeana, and that means soon we will have a worldwide network, a gigantic world library.
H.G. Wells's view of science and technology was what sustained him and sustained his ideas throughout his whole life. He had this sense that if only we could get the scientists and the technologists working in the right way, we could transform the world. And he continued with that belief up until the absolute final disillusionment with the entire human world, with a book which he calls, so fittingly, Mind at the End of Its Tether. He felt that the whole evolutionary process that he had been studying and that what he felt was leading us to something new and wonderful had failed. And his last words were that there was no way out or round or through.
Our world of self-delusion will perish amidst its evasions and fatuities. It is like a convoy, lost in darkness along an unknown rocky coast, with quarreling pirates in the chart room and savages clambering up the sides of the ship to plunder and do evil as the whim may take them. That is the rough outline of the more and more jumbled movie on the screen before us. There is no way out, or round, or through.